being in construction on a hot market still and being, in the school, I think definitely has a lot of benefits.
One was their roots within Denver, particularly within the real estate community. And secondly, just the small classroom sizes.
You're able to kind of pick and choose which path you want to go down, if it's property development or construction management or the real estate side, the more the financial side. You're able to kind of cater to your own wants for the program.
Hi, my name is Thomas Tafer.
Hi, my name is Megan Knapp.
Hi, my name is Eric Reimars, and I chose a Master's of Science in Real Estate in the Built Environment from the Daniels College of Business. If you're a working professional, you can definitely manage with a full-time job. There's a lot of people that do it.
The program has undergone some changes since Dr. Barbara Jackson became the director of the Burns School. And so she's tried to incorporate the construction management portion of our program a lot more into the design build realm and away from that traditional design bid build project delivery.
The integrated project delivery method brings together all the stakeholders, architects, general contractor, key trades, and sort of gets them all involved in the project before any designs are even started, and creates this collaborative team to deliver the project, which is something that is really new in the construction world.
The Burns School is really trying to be at the forefront of this, call it a movement.
The solar decathlon started when I was in architecture school, and when I found out that it was happening here, it was really exciting for me. It's a global student competition to design and construct prefabricated net zero homes. It had typically been held in Washington, D.C. on the Mall, but they recently moved it to Denver.
And I was actually able to complete the ASC Challenge, which is the Associated Schools of Construction, and we were in their graduate competition for integrated project delivery. And so they sent us to Reno, and 6 of us were able to work together.
Different sponsors put on different problem statements, and they pretty much lock us in a room for 17 hours and give us a ton of problems that have a lot of real-world applications, and expect us to come out at the end of the day with solutions to everything. And it's probably been the greatest memorable kind of experiences that I've had.
CityCraft was really that regenerative model, and that was a huge eye-opening experience of this entire program, and which helped shape to where I want to be in the future.
The Burns School is real good at bringing in industry folks and giving the students the chance to actually meet with them before graduation.
I've met a ton of alumni that have introduced me to other people, and my network just continues to grow.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Barbara Jackson, Director of the Franklin Burns School of Real Estate and Construction Management at the Daniels College of Business.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for attending this evening. We think we've got something pretty exciting to share with you. Let me just make a couple comments about the Burns School. I've been at the Burns School for about 6 years now, and I can tell you that we are very, very excited about what's happening with our program, but especially what's happening with the opportunities that are associated with our students and our graduates. One of the things we know is that the industry, what I call the industry of the built environment, is in a massive state of transition, and it has been for some time, quite frankly. So what we decided to look at is how can we develop the next generation of built environment professional. And what we came up with is teaching what we call the full life cycle of the built environment. So we're one of the most unique programs in the country in that we combine both real estate and construction management in a college of business. That doesn't exist anyplace else, not the way it's coordinated and planned at the Burns School. So we also are intentional about creating what we call the next generation of built environment professional, which we refer to as an IPL, an integrated project leader. Our students are able to consider all of the real estate and business transactional aspects of the process, along with not just construction management, but actually with project delivery and everything associated with that, including design phase management. And then we take a look at managing that asset after the fact. And what's the intention? Why do we do that? 3 reasons. The first reason is to generate greater value for our clients. The second reason is to eliminate waste. And most importantly, probably, is to mitigate risk. So we're very, very proud of both of our program and our students. And you heard from a few of the students in the video, and we're just growing every year. At least the six years that I've been here, we've grown every single year. So very proud of that. So before I introduce our guest speaker for tonight, let me just thank a few others. As you know, this series is a free series, The Voices of Experience, and open to the community. And we could not do that without the support of our financial sponsors. I want to thank U.S. Bank for its sustained and committed support of this program. They are an invaluable partner to Voices of Experience and to Daniels College of Business, and we are grateful to them for their partnership. We also want to thank the Zayo Group and Newmont Mining for their support and contribution as well. Now, let me introduce our speaker for this evening. Rhys Duggan has been a real estate investor and developer since 1996. Mr. Duggan, I think he says Duggan. I'm going to try it both ways. We'll see what he has to say. Mr. Duggan has served in senior level commercial development roles in Vancouver, British Columbia, Denver, and Nassau, Bahamas. He began his career in West Vancouver as the assistant to the mayor, learning the public permitting and entitlement processes. He then transitioned to the private sector with a large private landowner and developer, specializing in development of urban mixed-use properties. In 1998, he moved to Denver, and we're happy about that, where he was principal with Southwestern Investment Group, specializing in the development of grocery-anchored retail centers and master-planned residential communities. From 2006 to 2011, Reece served as president and CEO of the New Providence Development Company, the largest private landholder in Nassau. Through his leadership of Revesco Properties, he continues to develop and invest in retail, residential, office, and mixed-use projects with a focus on the Denver, Vancouver, Phoenix, Houston, and Salt Lake City markets. He is a principal in and managing member of the consortium that purchased Elitch Gardens in June 2015. So if you don't mind, let's welcome Rhys Duggan. He'll clear it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I answer to either. It's Duggan, but I do Duggan as well. So, hey, thanks for having me here tonight. I'm really excited to talk about the River Mile, and I'm going to assume that you all know very little about it, except maybe a headline you may have read in the paper. So my job, I think tonight, is just to give you all the facts. What is the River Mile? And not everyone's going to love the River Mile. I happen to love it. I think we're doing a lot of new and exciting things. But I want you all to have the facts, and then I'm more interested in your questions and what's in your minds about not only the River Mile, but also the future of Denver, Colorado. So I'm going to talk for maybe half an hour or so, and I'm going to break this down into 3 parts. One is the why, and I'm going to show you a short video on that. And by why, I mean why this project, why in Denver, Colorado, why now? And that came from a conversation that I had with the past planning director, Brad Buchanan. And I went in to talk to him as we were doing our due diligence to purchase this site back in late 2014. And he said to me, why? And I said, what do you mean, why? And he said, I get developers in my office all the time that say, Brad, I want to build a hotel. And Brad said, I would ask them why. And they would go, well, because I own this piece of land and I've always wanted to build a hotel. And as a city grows and develops, I don't think that's the right answer. I think we need to look at the larger context. So we're going to show a short video on the why. Then we're going to do a little PowerPoint presentation on the what. What is the River Mile? And we're going to also load up some virtual reality that we can take a little walkthrough of the project, maybe how it looks 25 years from now. And then we're going to finish with the how. I'm sure a lot of you have been to neighborhood meetings and you've been to maybe city council and you've seen developers like me stand up and show you pretty pictures and how everything's going to be rosy and we're going to solve the world's problems with one real estate development. But we're going to talk about the how. What's different, right? Especially right now where we are in the political process in the lead up to some city council elections coming up in early May. I hear a lot of rhetoric, a lot of conversation about we need to do things better, right? And I always think, what does that mean? What does better mean? Inherent in better, I think, is different. I don't think we can do things better without doing them differently. But what does that mean? We don't have an answer for what better means, but we have an answer to what differently means, and we're going to explore that a little bit tonight. So before we jump into that, tell you a little bit about myself that Barb didn't mention. Growing up in Vancouver, in kind of the mid and late 80s, I saw Vancouver grow up, as I call it, grow up as a city. It went from a sleepy little town to kind of a major player on the international stage. And I saw a lot as a kid growing up there. And what went into that? I think there's a perception from a lot of people that cities kind of happen by accident, and they really don't. They really require a lot of thought. They require a lot of arm wrestling. They require a lot of growing pains, and I watched that in Vancouver. And you'll hear me refer a fair bit tonight to Vancouver, and I don't do that because it's the be-all and the end-all. I do that because it's my reference point, and I think they got a lot of things right. Fast forward to 1998, I moved to Denver, Colorado, and I looked around the city, and what's happening right now reminds me a lot of what was happening in 1998. Massive in-migration, massive growth. I'd meet people and they're like, how long you lived here? And they'd be like, 2 weeks, a month, 3 weeks. So here we are again, right? And so one thing that really struck me, I had watched in Vancouver, as Vancouver hosted the World's Fair. For some of you, the expo, some of you may have gone to that. And that was hosted on a site that was very much like the Elitch Gardens site. It was right beside downtown. It was right on the water, albeit the Pacific Ocean and not the South Platte River, but we have what we have. So I watched that, and there was a sports stadium nearby in Vancouver, and we've got the Pepsi Center. And so as I was driving around Denver as a newcomer, I looked at the Elitch Gardens site, and I said, wow, this is like the Expo Land site. For those of you who know Vancouver, what was the Expo Lands is now kind of the new residential place to be in Vancouver along the water, right downtown, very walkable, great green space, great open space. So I looked at Elitch's and I said, that's the next Expo Lands. 1998, I like to joke that we don't move quickly because we bought it in 2015, but we bought it, and we bought it as an amusement park, but with a longer-term vision. I always say, if you've seen me present on this before, you've heard me say, first and foremost, the park is not closing. Tell your kids, come to the park. But we have a long-term vision, and I think what you'll see tonight is a 25-year plan. And so cities take time. Cities take time to grow. What I saw in Vancouver growing up as a city, I now see in Denver, Colorado growing up as a city. We got our rezoning on this site in late in 2018, December of last year. The 3-year process leading up to that was 240 meetings. So I read recently someone critiquing our project that we didn't have enough neighborhood consultation. I'd ask that person what the definition of enough neighborhood consultation is if it's not 240 meetings. But what came out of that was a realization for me that Denver really is growing up as a city. You know, we thought we would hear concerns from neighbors and residents talking about, oh my God, tall buildings, height, we don't want height. Oh my God, density, we don't want that. We don't want traffic. We didn't hear that. And that was even from our neighbors in Lodo and our neighbors across the highway in Jefferson Park. It was more of a conversation of better, right? If we're going to grow by 1 million people over the next 20 years in Metro Denver, how are we going to do that better, right? We've all sat in I-25 traffic and realized that that might not be the future, single occupant vehicles on I-25. So and to me, those conversations with the neighbors were a tribute, and it was evidence of the city growing up as a city and realizing we need to do things different. So I hope what you'll see tonight, what I present, and we'll talk about it after my presentation, is what is different and how are we different and how are we trying to tackle these problems of growth in a different way. So here we go.
Denver in one word.
Opportunity.
Refreshing.
Spectacular.
Awesome.
Dynamic.
Vibrant.
Chill.
Loving.
Beautiful. Fresh.
Eccentric.
Growing.
My name is Rhys Duggan. I'm the president and CEO of Revesco Properties. I feel lucky to be a resident in this great city. But I think people worry that Denver is changing for the worse and changing irreparably.
What frustrates me most about the city is just cost of living.
The rent is so high in Denver.
I mean, the traffic's not the best.
The traffic? The traffic.
A lot of traffic.
The number of people coming in.
There's a lot more people.
Now the prices are getting crazy and the housing is going nuts.
We're attracting people from not only both coasts and all over the country, but all over the world.
People are moving to the urban core, and they're being attracted here from across the country, and with that, we're seeing massive economic growth.
As we attract over 40,000 new residents per year to the metro, and the region is projected to grow by another 1 million people in the next 20 years, where are they going to live? Where are they going to work?
We have to accommodate not only those people who are moving here now, but those who want to move over the next 10 years.
I think Denver is going through a change right now, and there's an opportunity as a developer. Let's not grow out into the suburbs and into the farmland. Let's grow up and close in. People don't have to commute as far. The stress on the infrastructure is not as great.
What we're finding is that baby boomers and millennials actually want the same things out of their city. They want walkability. They want to live in the heart of things. They want to be able to be close to their work environment and have plenty of entertainment options.
What they really want is a new city neighborhood with affordable homes, good schools, grocery stores, daycare centers, restaurants, gathering places, all the things a real neighborhood should have, but in an urban setting where everything is close at hand. And as it happens, we know just the place for it. When Elitch moved here in the early 90s, it was a great interim land use for this site. Fast forward 25 years, this has become a focal point as a 62-acre site right downtown with a mile of riverfront with 2 light rail stops. The hole in the donut, we call it. As the city has grown around this site, we see an opportunity to fill in kind of the last major piece of downtown Denver. Let's add density where it makes sense. The fact that this piece of land is under one ownership is extraordinarily unique in an urban setting. What that lets us do is think of it holistically. We can plan it as a complete new urban downtown neighborhood. And there's one more reason why it's unique. The river is the focal point of this new city neighborhood, and the name kind of came naturally. It was the River Mile. And we want to create a new experience downtown for people to live and work and visit along the river edge, bringing the city to the edge of the river in a way that Denver hasn't seen before. And making it accessible to pedestrians and cyclists, but also accessible to people from all income groups without displacing current residents and without gentrifying traditional neighborhoods.
The main thing is to make great public spaces, to interact with the river, to allow people to come to the site freely from other parts of Denver, whether it's walking, biking, or taking the train, and allow for diversity over time.
We'd like to see a cross-section of Denver live here, and for the first time, we're focusing on families.
There's all these great organizations that kind of work quietly in the background to support this great river.
My name is Jeff Shoemaker. I'm the executive director of the Greenway Foundation. For the last 40+ years, the Foundation's mission has been to maximize the environmental and recreational health of Denver's greatest natural resource, and we do that both by revitalizing rivers and reconnecting communities. This site truly is a game changer for our city.
The historic South Platte River is a part of the West. It courses right through the center of the city, gives us an identification, and defines the opportunity for a project like the River Mile.
To see fishermen fishing in that river is just an unbelievable feeling. It makes me think that, hey, maybe we can make a difference. Maybe we can make it better.
The inspiration for great work, for community building, comes from all over the place.
I think there's some great examples that we can look to, not to replicate or mirror, but do it in a Denver way. My hope for Denver is to continue to grow into one of the great cities of America. I want to be really proud. I live half a mile from the site. This is my neighborhood.
Elitch's is going to be around for years to come. The park's going to continue to operate. This is a long-term plan for the property. It's going to take about 25 years to build out. When that time does come, when Elitch's moves, don't worry, we'll find it a better home.
Something's going to happen here, and it needs to be great.
Meanwhile, come to the park. How fun was that?
So that's the why. I mean, the basics are the River Mile is a 62-acre urban site proximate to downtown with 1 mile of riverfront. When we were in the process of buying that, I didn't believe it was actually a mile. So I had my engineer check it a number of times. It's actually 1 mile. Our vision, it's got 2 light rail stops adjacent to it. Our vision, our equity partner on this deal is Stan Kroenke, as many of you will know. We had some early meetings with Stan and talked about the vision for this site. And there were a number of ways to go with it. You'll see it across the country. There's a number of stadiums right now that are supporting kind of LA Live type of developments, kind of entertainment-based, what I call kind of Disneyland type of developments. And so we threw around a lot of options, and then Stan really shared our vision for, instead of that, let's make this a new downtown neighborhood, i.e. let's connect a street grid to it. Let's make it live and breathe. Let's make it a place where people can live and can work and can shop and can recreate along the river. And so that's what we call it. We call the River Mile a new downtown neighborhood. It's not a new downtown because we're not here to compete with downtown. It's a new downtown neighborhood that hopefully we can look around the world and steal some good ideas from, look at some things we've done well in Denver and some things we haven't done well, and improve on them. Before we look forward, let's look back a little bit. 1933. What's intriguing about this site is that if you're from Denver or know the history of Denver, you know that this mile stretch of river has basically been off limits for over 100 years. Back in the late 1800s, it was rail. Here we are in 1933. To orient you, Spear is at the top. The turntable, the old rail turntable in the middle is at the bend of the river. South edge of the site where Colfax is on the bottom of the screen. So there's been no access. It's been off limits. Fast forward 1946, a little bit better look. Gas plants, heavy rail, industry, a lot of environmental contamination on the site as a result. But once again, really cut off on our side of the river at least. No buildings, no residences, no retail, just rail yard. This is one of my favorites. This is urban planning in 1970. This is what we did with our rivers, is we turned them into scrapyards. But not uncommon, right? If we look at the history of cities in America, a lot of major US cities turned their back on the river, as did Denver. It was a sewer, it was a place for industrial waste and human waste, and it wasn't a place you wanted to be near. And so rail yards were on it, industry was along it, people weren't on it. Here was a wrecking yard that was along it. And it's only been, I don't know, in the last couple of decades that I think major cities in America have realized that rivers are actually assets. They're not a sewer. They're a place for the people. And in Denver, Colorado, we collaborate with a number of groups including the Greenway Foundation, which we should all thank. Their sole mandate is to improve our experience as residents along the South Platte River and Cherry Creek. And a lot of the work in reclaiming our rivers in Metro Denver has been a result of their work to make it a habitable place. So how do we go about planning this new downtown neighborhood? And we're going to talk to Steve Nally from the city a little bit later on. But it starts with a lot of conversations with the city and a lot of conversations with the neighborhoods. In this case, it involved us taking an existing document, a comprehensive plan, call it that perhaps. In here we call it the Downtown Area Plan. The Downtown Area Plan is a zoning document that basically sets out the overarching goals for downtown Denver and breaks it down by neighborhood. What's the goals for the downtown core? What are the goals for the Golden Triangle? What are the goals for the Golden Triangle? We had a kind of a blank canvas in the area plan, so we had to amend that. And that was a large part of our 240 meetings with the city and with the public neighborhood groups, saying, what do you all want to see here? We have an idea, but we want to listen to you. This graphic won't tell you very much. I mean, this was one of the results of our area plan amendment. You can see the general principles on the right of the downtown area plan, what city leaders and residents want to accomplish in downtown: prosperous, walkable, diverse, distinctive green. I think the graphic on the left, the reason I put it up here is just to illustrate my earlier point, which is instead of a Disneyland, LA Live type of development, this is an extension of the street grid. This is downtown. This is a neighborhood, a downtown neighborhood, with access points out to Spear, across the rail to Auraria, and across the river. So next level is we take that area plan, now that the city and the residents and city councils voted on it and everyone's in agreement, and we kind of bring it down a few notches, a few levels, get a little more granular in our detail, and we come up with a site plan that looks like this. Basically, a better articulation of that street network that we saw in the earlier slide. What jumps out to me when I look at this slide, for those who aren't in the business, it might look a little blurry. But what jumps out to me on this is the contrast between what we're proposing on the south, I call it the south side of the river, compared to what's happened on the north side of the river. There were some old planning principles in Denver, and I noticed them in 1998 when I moved here, and I noticed that there is no activity on the river. There's no restaurants, there's no bars, they're very limited residential. There was a little bit on Cherry Creek, the townhouses on Cherry Creek. But kind of the planning mandate back in the day was where there's a river, there must be a park, right? And we see that on the north side of the river here. Riverfront, if this slide went to the east a little bit, you'd see the riverfront neighborhood. You'd see a continuation of that. All of riverfront as a park. I think our planning principles have evolved. So as we move to the south side of the river on our site plan here, what strikes me is buildings up to the edge of the river. Buildings on the edge of the path. Not turning our back, not creating a buffer between people and the river, but bringing people to the river. In fact, I think someone asked me, is how will you measure success of the River Mile? And my success metric for the River Mile is really simple. How many people can we bring to the river edge? Whether you're fishing in it, you're playing in it, you're kayaking, you're tubing, you're walking along it, you're walking your dog, you're doing yoga beside it, you're having lunch beside it, you're at a bar, whatever it is, how can we activate this river that we've turned our back on historically? And so that's what this site plan hopes to do. You'll see in the middle, you'll see a big open plaza. That is it's a 4-acre event and public park and plaza space, which meets one of the city's downtown park plans, a major event space. We have a network of paths, both pedestrian and bike paths along the river edge that we'll get into in a little more detail later in the presentation. We have a couple of bridges. I happen to live in Lohi. For those of you who live in Lohi or spend time over there, you probably realize what that bike and pedestrian bridge did at 16th Street when they opened it, linking Lohi to downtown. It's become kind of the bike superhighway, I call it. But what it did is it really opened up our Lohi neighborhood and made it an extension of downtown. So a couple of bike and pedestrian bridges crossing the river. In the center lower portion of the slide, you'll see a bridge going over the heavy rail at 7th, connecting to Auraria Parkway and through into the campus. 7th, for those of you who know Auraria, is where the gas station is. so a new vehicular connection there. And then, like I said, a traditional city block grid. For the planners or architects or urbanists in the audience, you may notice that those blocks are smaller than our average Denver block. In some cases, they're half the size of a Denver block. What that means for planners and architects and urbanists is smaller blocks are more walkable. The example that I give is if you've been to Manhattan and you walk north-south, the blocks are about a quarter of the size as they are east-west. And if you're walking east-west, you kind of get lost in these buildings. So a finer grain block size means more walkability. And very, very highly focused around our 2 light rail stops. I wish I had a pointer here. I don't. Obviously, one right by Pepsi Center, our existing light rail stop, and then on the bottom left, down by the stadium stop for Mile High. So 2 light rail stops. What this does is really, really attempt to leverage the multi-billion-dollar investment we've made as taxpayers in light rail in Denver, Colorado. I'm a big believer in rail. I don't think you can be a world-class city anymore without a comprehensive rail system. I think the rail to the airport is a game changer for us becoming, I affectionately refer to as a grown-up city. Some people take that as an insult, but I don't mean it that way. And I really think that Denver is really in the second inning of its rail game, as I call it. I think we need to continue to invest in rail and continue to get people out of their single occupant vehicles and onto alternate multimodal transportation systems. This slide is a first phase. Like I said, the park is not going away. Buy your season's pass. We're selling them still. This is our phase 1. We have 17 acres of surface parking lots. There was an urbanist blog that was online that had a contest. It was an international contest, and it was for the worst parking crater in North America. And a parking crater was an urban parking lot most grossly underutilized. And we're really proud to say that we won. We won. We have the largest parking crater in North America. So what phase 1 is taking that 17 acres of surface parking, consolidating a lot of that parking into a parking structure of 1,400 stall parking garage that can service the park in the interim as we develop on the 17 acres around it. In terms of size and scale, River Mile in 25 years will probably be home to between 12 and 15 million square feet, built square feet. For those of you who are in the business, you're probably saying, wow, that's a lot. For those of you who aren't in the business, I'll give you a comparison. The entire built environment of downtown. And so, I don't know, drop a pin at 17th and Larimer and go out a mile or so. Total built environment is 63 million square feet, give or take. So we're talking an additional 12 to 15 million square feet. Sounds like a lot, right? Sounds like a lot. But keep in mind 25 years, right? Where has Denver come in the last 25 years? How many people, how many square feet have we built in the last 25 years? This is phase 1. This is about 4 million square feet. 4 million square feet that keeps the park in operation. I use the phrase the foreseeable future. People ask me what that means, and I don't know, it depends on where the cycle takes us and where demand is, but I'm thinking at least 10 years the park is there. This is my favorite slide. This is where everyone groans. This is, don't worry, this isn't what we're doing. This is a massing and density study that we did. We took the existing zoning on the site and said, what if we just built under the existing zoning? And we've got a really unique zoning, or did have a unique zoning on it, which had a 200-foot height limit across the site. That's what that reflects. That's 200 feet of zoning across the site would yield about 10 million square feet of building. So 12 to 14, slight upzoning. Another thing that irks me when I read the media, how it's this massive upzoning that we just went through and it's really not that great. It's 20 to 40% more density. But how can we do that better, right? I think we'll all agree that's probably not what we want to see in Denver, Colorado as we drive downtown at the gateway to our city. So how can we do that differently? Maybe it looks like that. Right, so 10 million, 14 million. Obviously a totally different building form, right? What do you see when you look at that? I see a lot of tall buildings. I see a lot of more slender buildings. That was a lot of feedback we had from the neighbors. Said tall buildings don't scare us. We don't dislike tall buildings. Tall buildings mean more porosity, mean more view corridors, mean more natural light. I see buildings right up on the river edge, like we saw in the site plan, bringing some activity down to the river's edge. I see a really different building style than what we see in Denver, Colorado today. And that's, once Steve comes up, we're going to talk a lot about why different, how do we do different in Denver, Colorado. I'm sure we all drive around Denver and we see a lot of the same stuff, right? As developers, we like to follow the herd, right? We like to do what's proven. We like to do what is accepted. And so as a result, we see a lot of, this cycle, we see a lot of 5-story stucco buildings with white vinyl windows, right? And this is about doing something differently and doing it in a different way. Okay, now the technology part. We're going to do a little VR walkthrough of the site. So if you have a mobile phone, you can take it out, take a shot of that. Don't worry about if you don't, because we're going to walk you through it on screen. But if you want to drive through the presentation yourself on your own phone, you can do that. So I'll give you a little bit of time to get set up. Like I said, don't freak out if you can't get it. We're going to do a group walkthrough as well. All right, I see some people have it. For those who don't, you're going to play along with me on screen here. For those who did get taken to the website, here's a little tutorial on how to walk through it. I think the most interesting button you need to know is in the bottom of right that we've labeled gyroscope. Click on that and that will give you free rein to walk wherever you want by moving your phone. You can kind of pan throughout the development. You can switch scenes on the left side. So we're going to switch over and we're going to do this on screen for those who don't have it on their phone. So we're going to work, if you can picture this, we're going to work kind of from Spear and we're going to work upstream to Colfax. And we're going to take you through a few vignettes of what you'll see along the way. Keep in mind, this is not the architecture. These are just placeholders. These are not fully developed buildings, the architecture, just to give you a feel for the environment that we're trying to create right along the river edge. What jumps out to me as we look at this vignette is obviously a really prominent bike and pedestrian path along the river edge. I think from a built environment standpoint, what jumps out to me is activation right along the path. In this context, it happens to be residential. Townhomes opening onto the path at the podium of a tower. The hope is the experience that you get at the ground level will be the experience that you feel as you walk along that edge. And the towers will not dominate this site. It will be the street activation and the path activation. Moving a little bit upstream, this was the Central Plaza area that I talked about on the site plan, a 4-acre event space and public gathering space. Once again, a separation of bikes and peds. I've recently taken up road biking, so I bike along the path a lot. I bike along the South Platte, and I can't believe more people don't get killed along that path. Because, really basic stuff, right? Let's separate the bikes and the pedestrians, really simple. And let's also give people a gathering place. So this, you can see Mile High on the right, Mile High Stadium. This is about where the roundhouse was on the historic photos of the site, kind of at the bend in the river, kind of halfway upstream. There's a bend in the river, and this is our community node. And what do I mean by that? You may have heard me in the video talk about how really, really unique it is to have 62 acres in the heart of a downtown North American city owned by one developer. And what does that mean for us as residents of the city? What it means is, think about what makes Stapleton desirable, right? Why do people want to move to Stapleton? Parks, right? Schools, open space, rec centers, all those things, libraries, all the things that we normally equate with kind of what we call in the business brownfield development or greenfield development out in the suburbs. And so 62 acres, one developer, we can amenitize this in a similar way. So this area that we're looking at now at the bend of the river becomes what we call our community center. So what goes here? A school goes here. A daycare goes here. A community center. A library. A bike ped link across to the Children's Museum across the river. And why are we doing that? It's because, like I said earlier, we're trying to create a new downtown neighborhood. And what goes into a new downtown neighborhood? Like I said, cities don't happen by accident, right? We've done a really good job in Denver, I think, of building a downtown for one demographic. I think if you're 25 to, I don't know, call it 32 years old, or 22 to 32, we've built a really great downtown. It's lively, it's fantastic, there's a lot of cheap rental apartments, there's studios and bars and restaurants. And what I feel is lacking, though, is and maybe it's self-serving, it's people like me and older, and I look around, and we haven't done a good job of building a downtown for that demographic. And I don't think you can have a true complete city without incorporating a multitude of demographics in our city. And I've heard the story so many times, like you all have probably. If your friends are younger, how many of them lived in the city and then, oh, we got married, we had kids, we had to move out of the city, right? We had to go to Thornton or Broomfield or Stapleton or Lowry or wherever for schools and amenities and all those things that families need. We haven't done a good job of building a city for families. So as we look at this site, 62 acres, and we can amenitize it, I think we can do a better job of keeping a larger demographic variety within the city. And this is the epicenter of that. Flipping over really quickly, this is our multimodal transit hub, which is where the existing light rail stop at Pepsi Center is. Like I said, I'm a firm believer that we're in the second inning of our light rail game in Denver, Colorado. I think we need to do a better job of leveraging our investment in light rail. This is one way to do it. Shameless plug for Meow Wolf. If you haven't heard of Meow Wolf, they're an exciting group out of Santa Fe, New Mexico. And we are proud to welcome them to Denver as their first location outside of Santa Fe. This happens to be right almost under the Colfax Viaduct along the river. Here's a shot looking back at our future development in 25 years and then the existing city on the right-hand side. Developers are the smartest people, right? Like me, I'm the smartest developer. I thought the south end of the site, that's going to be years away. We're never going to develop that. That's going to be, I don't know, 10 years, 20 years out. Turns out that's where it starts. This is where our river mile starts with Meow Wolf opening and hopefully in August of 2020. So it shows you what I know. So we wanted to give you a little taste. Like I said, ignore the architecture. I hope that gives you a taste of what that experience is going to be along the river. I want to flip over now to talk a little bit about the how. How do we do that? This is a big project, right? 25 years, 62 acres, a lot of infrastructure. We made an early decision as a developer to not seek city assistance. So there is no tax increment financing. There is no sales tax rebate. So this is all developer funded. We did form a metro district on this site. So we do have access to metro district funding, but no public funding on this site. On the left, a more detailed rendering of what that community node might look like with the school and daycare and bridge over to the Children's Museum. On the right, just kind of a sampling of the major public amenity and public infrastructure moves that need to happen here on this site. The biggest one, and I won't go through these in detail because we're running short on time, but the biggest one probably is regional flood control improvements and 1 mile of South Platte River improvements. Some of you may know that about 1/3 of our site, 1/4 or 1/3 of our site is in a 100-year FEMA floodplain. So it impacts kind of the spear end of our site. The entire Pepsi Center is under the 100-year floodplain. And so for this to happen, we need to get this land out of the floodplain, make it safe for residents, property owners. How we do that is we redredge a 1 mile stretch, a little over a 1 mile stretch of the South Platte River. We lower it about 8 feet. which is really great from a flood control standpoint, but what gets me excited about that is the opportunity that it creates for us to really improve the user experience along that river stretch. A lot of the pretty pictures you saw, you know, if you live in Denver, you'll say that's not the Platte. And you're right, we're not gonna make it blue, but we're gonna, by dredging it, by taking on a project like that, we can vastly reshape what the recreational opportunities along that stretch of river are. That's what gets me really excited. We've touched on most of the other amenities on that list, so I won't dwell on them. Segue into what Steve and I are gonna talk about, more of the how. Right, developers are always great at promoting their projects, and they're gonna be the best and the greatest, and then you go visit them and often they're just more of the same, right? And it's kind of disappointing. So we really took some bold steps with the city, and a tribute to the city, they have been open to these, you know, parking maximums. You know, the traditional model is parking minimums. We need to provide as much parking for single occupant vehicles as we can, or people will not come to our fill in the blank apartment building, shopping center, office, whatever. We've said, hey, we don't want to make this car-free, but we want to make this multimodal friendly and multimodal focused. And a big part of that is saying we're going to limit the amount of parking we're going to provide here, and hopefully that will incentivize people to take other modes of transport to get to this site. Mandatory transportation demand management, we could talk about that for hours. That's things like offering residents and workers free transit passes. That's like uncoupling residential parking spaces from the sale of condominium units, making people buy them separately. A whole host of transportation demand management strategies that we will implement on the site. Building floor plate maximums. How do we stop building these, I call them husky or chunky buildings that we love in Denver, these squat, large floor plate buildings. We do that by limiting the size of floor plates, both in the office component and more significantly in the residential component. Active use wrapped parking, that's a fancy way of saying let's not build parking garages at street level. Let's wrap them with something active and interesting so you're not walking by the sea of parking in a parking structure. Tower spacing, getting back to porosity, views, light, air, sunshine. You do that by giving space between towers. 15% parks and open space, we're super excited about this. The city minimum is 10%. A developer comes in and says, I want to do 62 acres. The city's going to say, you need to give us 10% parks and open space. We've said, we'll give you 15%. And a lot of that is due to the river, because I think the river is an amenity for the city, not only for our development, but for the city that has been off limits for over 100 years. If you followed our rezoning in the media, I joke that the entire rezoning came down to one thing. Right? We're rezoning 62 acres, a large portion of downtown, and people don't want to talk about parks and rec centers and open space and traffic and heights and views and density. They all just want to talk about affordable housing. And so it really did come down to that. I'm proud that we agreed to what is the most comprehensive affordable housing program in the history of Denver. And we did that because as we build a new, complete, diverse downtown neighborhood, we need that. If we're just building a bunch of towers for wealthy folks to buy condos by the river, then I think we failed. Mandatory design review, I'm a fan of that. I think we've seen the fallout here in Denver of some neighborhoods that don't have design review, and we get some buildings that I may term unfortunate. Was that politically correct? Point towers, what are point towers? Point towers are architect speak for skinny towers. Small floor plate, 8,000, 10,000, 12,000 square foot floor plate towers. A lot of the offices you see now, by contrast, in Denver are about 25,000 feet floor plate. Smaller towers, mass reduction, which means don't build a big blocky tower, step it back from the street, make it narrow, step it back. Final point, let's not build out the lot line on every single lot we have downtown. Let's create some on-site open space in addition to the 15% parks and open space on the site. Let's put them on each lot as well. Another shameless plug for Meow Wolf, come and see it. Here I am. So my girlfriend was so great to get me into fly fishing 3 years ago, and like I said, I live in Lohi, so I put two and two together and I said, why don't we put some fish in this river and we can go fish there? And this, believe it or not, is under I-25. So right between the roller coaster and Mile High Stadium, right under I-25. I caught that fish about 8 months ago, and I'll tell you a quick story. I'll wrap up with this story because I really want to hear your questions. We did an experiment about 2.5 years ago. We said, what can we do to change local Denver folks' perception of what the South Platte River is? i.e., it's no longer a sewer, right? i.e., it's a recreational asset to embrace. And so we said, what if we put some fish in there? And true story, we did it under the cover of darkness. We didn't tell anyone, there was no media. And the reason we did that, honest to God, is because we didn't know what was going to happen to them, right? we literally did not want to be the developer that put all the dead fish in the South Platte River. That's a true story. And so, lo and behold, now when I bike by there, or ride by there, or walk by there, there's fishermen, there's fly fisher. We've done 3 stockings. Now everyone feels obligated to send me all their fish pictures. So in my inbox, and I have one, and I'll show you later if you care to see it. There's one this guy sent me about 6 months ago, and it is 25 inches long. There is a rainbow trout, at least one. We know there's one, there may be more. There's a 25-inch rainbow trout in here. So why is that exciting for me, aside from the fact that my girlfriend got me into fly fishing and I can walk here? I think it is the first step of changing perceptions on what this river can be. And like I said, my key performance metric on this development is how do we get the most residents of the Metro Denver area and tourists down to this river doing what they love to do? And this is a first start. So with that, that's all I have. I'm going to bring Barb and Steve out now, and we're going to have a little more in-depth chat about how do we pull this off. What does it take, cooperation from the city? So thank you for sitting through that.
Okay, so that was fantastic, I think. Who's joining us right now is Steve Nally, and Steve is a neighborhood planning manager with the City of Denver. And Reece, why don't you give a brief introduction of Steve, seeing you've been working with him for a while now?
Yeah, so a lot of what we're talking about, a lot of those change standards, and I could go on, we could talk about wastewater and stormwater and one water principles and transit and energy and how we do things differently, and there's a whole host of things that we'll implement on this site, but none of that can happen without the city, right? The city has all the power. And so cities are hard, right? Cities don't like change, and there's a little story that I heard in Los Angeles as we were out there with the Downtown Denver Partnership, and I talked to this city parks person who said he was talking about a park project that he had implemented in downtown San Francisco, and he talked about how hard it was to get the city on board. And he said there's 2 types of bureaucrats, and both of them result in the same level of inaction. And there's the bureaucrat that's afraid to do things differently because they'll lose their job. Oh my God, I did something different, I'm going to get fired, I don't have a pension, I don't have a job, I better stick with the status quo. And then there's the other type of bureaucrat who says, well, we can't do this, we can't do things differently because it'll set a precedent, right? And if the River Mile does it, then everyone else has to do it. And that'll be terrible, and we just can't have that, it'll be mayhem. And I'm really happy to say that Steve is neither of those. Steve is one who likes to say yes, one who understands that in order to build a better city, perhaps we need to do things differently from a city standpoint. And so he's been a champion, he's become a friend, he's given me the best roadmap that I could hope for in the city, so I'm happy to have him here with us.
Awesome. Thank you, Reece.
Steve. Thanks for joining us tonight. So, Steve, nothing like this ever happens without a partnership and without collaboration. So why don't you share with us what it's been like to partner with Reece, and what's that collaboration been like?
Sure. This is really exciting. And maybe that's the enthusiasm that Reece likes to hear. But, the city is also really excited about this. I think too often planning departments and developers are battling. And we, the community, all of us have to live with that result. And I think, there's some barriers to overcome to get to this partnership, to get to this relationship, because it is so critical. Planners don't build anything. Developers do, and so we need developers in order to accomplish the goals of the city, the goals of planners, the goals that the community tells us what they want. So there are planners that think all developers are just trying to get every ounce of profit out of the land and don't want to be stewards. And then developers think that planners are idealistic, pie in the sky thinking, and we have no idea how things actually get done. And both of those respective parties exist. Both of those extremes exist in the city, and it took the planning department recognizing that we need developers to accomplish our goals, and it also took a developer that was willing to say yes, that was willing to take the long view and look out into the future and say yes to that long list of things that many developers would not agree to do.
Yeah. So say a little more about how Revesco's approach was different. In other words, what had you see something different here that said, this is a big, challenging, risky project, but I think we should stay with this and keep working on this?
Sure. I think Reece is secretly a planner. I really do. I mean, I think that, one, the long-term view. I think oftentimes the approach is we're looking, 3 or 4 years out, and we need to get this thing built, and we need to make our investors happy. And so I think the willingness to take the long-term view, this is a 25-year project, it's very complicated, there are a lot of things to accomplish. I also think that Revesco has pushed the city more than, it pushed the planning department more so than the planning department has pushed him, and that is typically just the opposite. Typically the planning department is really pushing developers to deliver that long list of things, hoping for the best. And like I said, it's just the opposite. Revesco said, we want to do things differently. We want to accomplish the goals that you say you want to accomplish. Let's get busy. Let's do it. And now we're really having fun. So.
Well, I'm sure it hasn't happened without some resistance. In other words, what has been the resistance from the city side to this project?
So I think I want the help of the audience to walk through this. So bear with me, this may not work. But just for a second, imagine that you are stuck on the highway, you're on I-25 or you're on I-70. You don't have to close your eyes. Don't want it to get awkward, but you know the feeling. Now raise your hand if you want to fix that. Okay. Now raise your hand if you think by adding lanes to that highway, it will address congestion. All right.
Yes.
That is
all right,
awesome.
our work is done.
Our work is done. Our work is done. No one raised their hand. I was actually not expecting that. And I think, to pivot, because I was expecting a different result, your voice really matters. You are voters, our politicians, our decision makers. You are pushing our decision makers to make those choices, but they may not always hear you. So it is difficult, I think, to turn the ship, to make a change, to introduce maximum parkings, to design streets differently, to really try to align the standards with the goals. I think that is really difficult for a city to do quickly.
Yeah. Actually, I want you to say a little more about the city's goals and how they align with what Reece is trying to accomplish with this project. So just give us a couple examples of how they're actually aligned.
Sure. Small blocks, walkability, I think that's a big one. Reece touched on that. Affordable housing is a major issue in the city right now. I think open space and a robust amount of open space and all different types of open space. For this site in particular, cleaning it up, being a good steward of the land, introducing new access to the river, new recreation, creating new opportunity to engage with the river. Also, Vision Zero, zero traffic deaths by 2030. Getting 30% of commuters out of their car by 2030. Those are big goals, and I think it's going to take a lot of shifting of our standards to get us there.
So this partnership, I mean, you've had a lot of conversations back and forth about these goals, and are they aligned? Were they aligned right from the beginning? Or was there some dialogue back and forth to become aligned? How did that actually take place? Was it right there, or tell us a little bit about the process.
So we asked Reece to take a back seat. We said, time out. If you go to the community and just show them this and say this is what we want to do, it may not go that well. And so it did take a lot of conversations to say, take a time out, let's ask the community what they want. And the community said that this is what they wanted. And so I think that's a very different approach, and the willingness to take that step back really helped.
So, Reece, I understand that the 60 acres of downtown Denver got rezoned for this project without any objections from Denver citizens. How in the world did that happen?
Yeah, that surprised even me, really. I think Steve hit on it. It's 240 meetings, right? It's listening to people. I mean, this is fancy for us. I'm usually in people's living rooms, or I'm in a church hall, or I'm at a community center talking. It's really talking it out. I think the fact that I live in the neighborhood helps. I mean, I'm not a foreign developer flying in to tell Denver what it needs. And so I think that was important. And I also, I touched on it briefly in my presentation, was I think Denver is growing up as a city. And I think the residents are realizing that the old model is not working. So let's try a different approach. And they grabbed a hold of this one.
Yeah. You know, in my class, very recently, just the last week, I had a student make a comment that Denver is actually becoming a real city. And that was their words, a real city. So why should Denver residents care about this particular development? And I'd like both of you to share something here. What is going to, what in this project is going to help it turn into that real city, if you don't mind, or in your own words, what does that mean? Why is it special? Why is it noteworthy? Why should Denver residents embrace this project?
You want to go first?
Sure. I think it's tough in Denver. I don't know that we have a 20-minute neighborhood in Denver where you can live, work, play, buy your groceries, take care of your daily needs, take your kids to school, all of those things by walking. 20 minutes. I don't think that exists in Denver. It does? I live downtown. All right, so I still have to drive to certain things, right? And would love to talk to you and engage in this conversation, but we just got a grocery store. My dentist is in the building that I live in. We're getting there, and I think this is part of what we're hearing. But it's fairly rare to have that.
I think it's two things for me. The question is, why should we care about this development? Number one, I think, is the access to this important stretch of river. A lot of the river, for those of you who bike it or run it or walk along it, realize that it's not hospitable in a lot of stretches. A lot of it is high bank. A lot of it is heavy industrial. This stretch happens to be very low bank, has great access. So I think it's unlocking that. And I scratch my head quite often when I have visitors from out of town and they say, you're going to work, what should I do today? Right? And so I go, well, you should go to Union Station, that's cool. And you should, of course, go to Elitch's because it's awesome. But after that, I start to run short, right? So I think we should care as we amenitize this river and open it up to everyone and make it an activity zone. And I think we should care about it because This is one of my pet peeves as I travel around North America and I look at different cities and try and learn what people are doing right and what they're doing wrong. And I really worry about the homogenization of our North American cities, right? We go into different cities and they all start to look the same, right? The fire department dictates how wide the street section is going to be, right? Emergency services drives that, engineering drives that. And so we have national standards, and that depresses me really. When I go somewhere else, to Europe, for example, every city has character and a flavor. And so that's one of the things we're trying to accomplish in the River Mile, and we're pushing the city. We're done with Steve now, we're under the Public Works Department. And you know, in all seriousness, that's our next heavy lift, is how do we design this to be not just another city and not homogenous? And so I think that's why we should care about it, because it's a really important opportunity.
Very good, very good. So let's talk about the business side for a minute, all right? The money. It all starts with the money, doesn't it? So how did you get this project to pencil out?
I'll take it. Okay.
Ask me in 20 years. We'll see if it did.
Very good.
You know, in all seriousness, I think for those of you in the development world, you'll understand this. It's so important to have the right capital partner, right? If I had a capital partner that wanted to see a return on their investment, I think Steve mentioned it, within a 3-year window or a 5-year window, or the IRR clock is ticking, we would have a very different conversation than the one we're having right now. I give a lot of kudos to my equity partner, Stan Kroenke, who cares a lot about this city. Ironically, he happens to be the closest neighbor to the site with his house on top of the Pepsi Center. He has a long-term vision, and he's patient, and he is patient capital. And in his words, if we don't get it right, his son Josh will, or Josh's kids will. And so he has, you know, the financial strength to do it, but he also has the vision and the patience. And I think all of Denver, including myself, are very fortunate that we have him as a partner on that.
Yeah. The long view is something that I know in the planning world, they're not used to necessarily seeing that perspective. So it sounds like it has made quite a difference.
Absolutely, yes.
So I also understand that Revesco has put in a great deal of effort in cleaning up that river. I'd like you to talk a little bit about actually what you've done, what that's taken. I heard a bit about why you've done it, but tell us what it's actually taking to do that.
A lot of that heavy lifting hasn't started yet. A lot of that will come with the redredging of that reach of the river. We've done environmental testing in the river. We're lucky that most of the silt and sediment that has settled in this reach is not toxic. It's clean. So it's just a dredging of the river. I think a lot of the challenges we have are watershed wide, right? I mean, we have a 1 mile stretch of this river. We can't control what goes on upstream. And so I think that's where I give kudos to people like the Greenway Foundation, who really take a watershed wide approach, saying, if we're gonna have the most vibrant, sustainable trout fishery in an urban city in North America, in Denver, Colorado, which I believe is entirely possible, that's going to require a lot of us to lean in and get involved upstream to make that happen. So a lot of that is to be determined, both on our stretch and watershed wide. I think from an environmental standpoint, what Steve mentioned is this is an opportunity to clean up this site, not only the river, but the site. We have a lot of the same contaminations that Union Station had, that your neighborhood, Steve, Riverfront had. So it's not new information. It's just now is the time to get this cleaned up so it's safe for all.
Steve, is this, again, I'm always listening for the how it's different approach. Is this something you might have expected from any developer to come in and want to do this and clean up this river?
Well, it's tough to say just when you tie it to clean up, because if you want to build residential, you have to clean it up.
Yeah.
There are rules. But I think in order to develop this site, you have to take the long-term view. You have to be able to accomplish the things that Reece and his investors are able to accomplish. Otherwise, I just don't think it would be possible. I think it would continue to be an amusement park until the next Reece came along.
Yeah, good. All right. right, we'd like to take an opportunity to open up for questions from the audience. I think we've got a couple of folks who are going to have some microphones. We've got about 15 minutes, so they're going to grab the mics and they'll be down here shortly. Up front here.
And here.
Hello. Hi there. My wife and I live right down at the confluence of the two rivers, so we've heard the stories about Shoemaker Plaza and dredging and what they ran into there. Yeah. Are you anticipating that type of problem all the way up the river, or has it been tested and that Shoemaker Plaza issue is not present?
We've done a lot of testing. Dealing with environmental contamination is unfortunately a little bit like an Easter egg hunt. You got to look all over to find it. So we've done a lot of borings, and we think we know where it is and we can handle it. A lot of the challenge that happened at Shoemaker Plaza was they started to cut into the bank, cut into it. We're not contemplating a lot of that. And so I hope not. If you live there like I do, you know what that meant in time and cost. So we think we have it handled, but we know we'll have surprises. Like, we don't know where it all is by any stretch. One thing I failed to mention was one element of the site that is kind of crucial, and I should have mentioned this, was we are raising the grade of our site by as much as 20 feet, right? It's pretty interesting. Try and visualize this. If we look at the site plan, on the bottom part of the site is the heavy rail line, the CML line. So at that edge, we raise it about 20 feet, and then we taper it down to the existing grade along the river edge. And that has a lot of benefits for us. But one of them is providing a layer of protection from environmental contamination. And so that's one way of dealing with it, in addition to excavating as we dig for roads and foundations.
Is that going to go on during phase one, that river part, while you're doing the parking in the first phase? That'll begin at the same time?
Right. The first move is the river. Nothing happens without the river going. We're in discussions whether we can start building the parking garage at the same time and do them parallel, but nothing happens without the river.
Hi there, I'm Susan Werspan, and thank you. First of all, welcome. And it's the planners, yay. Okay, I lived downtown for 15 years. I know your name's Steve. I can't pronounce yours. I lived downtown for 15 years. I have a business downtown for 15 years. I live 3 blocks from Cherry Creek before it comes into the Platte. Or the Platte going into the Cherry Creek. My 2 concerns are pollution and safety. And here's why. I loved your question, thank you very much. It's the dredging. You make that the lowest spot in Denver, and all the pollutions from Purina and all the pollution glide down the river because it's moving. So it's not cleanable yet, and that's what you're going to find out. Okay? Is there anything you haven't told us about? I am a nice person, you guys. I'm a consultant, and I research for a living. But can I give you some stats?
Sure.
Okay. You will ride home with me, won't you? Okay, I think I can remember my stats. 2012, 700,000 pounds of toxins are dropped in the watershed. It's the second polluted river in Colorado. So where do you get your hope?
Sure. Well, you wouldn't be a developer if you weren't an optimist, right? Nothing would get built.
Okay.
And I am an optimist, and I think I touched on that when I talked about, the challenge is watershed wide, right? We can't solve all the problems here because, to your point, the water is flowing past our site, and so we all need to lean in and make a commitment as a region to say we want clean water flowing through our city to be a priority. And that means industry needs to get on board. That means wastewater needs to get on board. And so I'm going to start picking more fights because it's a problem.
So you're going to pick fights with the industry?
Sure.
That sounds bad. You're going to make agreements with industry as well as with...
Not just me. I hope you will as well as a resident.
Well, that's why
and you'll say, we need this.
I did my homework before I came. I mean, I want to be part of this. I live downtown. I want to see it get better. My second concern, and I'll make it very short, there's others with questions, is safety. I live on a tall building, and I love it. I have a front range view. I'm not going to ever move. I ride bicycles. I kayak. I do not ride bicycles downtown, and I do not kayak in, I'm sorry, I don't know, was that fish plastic? I'm keeping it light, you guys. Truly, I am concerned about the safety, and at the multimodal, I feel that Denver needs to go there, but they're being pushed, and where they have the second highest pedestrian death in the United States for a city our size, as you spoke to, and that's zero vision. So how are we going to have that less parking space and more multimodal? And I'm still glad you're here.
Thank you. There's a lot of things to unpack in that one question statement.
Okay,
and
I'll
so
sit down
I'm trying to unpack them all. Bike and pedestrian safety, 100% it's a problem. How do you do that? You do that a bunch of different ways, and I'm speaking quickly because I want to get to some more questions. You do that a bunch of ways. You do that smaller blocks, more walkable. You do narrower street sections. You slow traffic down. You get people out of their cars. You have protected bike and pedestrian lanes, a whole bunch of different ways. And that's part of my public works arm wrestle, because status quo, how we've done it, hasn't helped us. It hasn't kept us safe. So how do we do that differently? Short answer. Good.
Thank you very much. This is truly exciting. And, you know, Federico Peña challenged us to imagine a great city, and I think you are imagining something truly great. But you have to then have a huge imagination. And so 25 years is such a long time. So this is an easy question probably, but it's, how do you future-proof something like that? How do you see the role of the automobile, the role of leads, the role of technology, so that you are keeping up with the changes and that when you're done in 25 years, you're in the future?
Really good question. We're having that debate right now. We're about to have it in a more robust way with Public Works, and I'll give you an example of how that debate will live. Is, hey, Public Works, why are we building an 8-lane street section when 25 years from now we don't know what traffic demand is going to be? Right? So really simple, but there's a lot of complexity to that question. On a technology side of things, people ask me what's the most daunting part of this project, and for me personally, it's technology. You know, I hate the phrase smart city because I think that's just a given now. If we're developing cities, of course they need to be smart, so I don't use that phrase. But what scares me is, how do we decide between what is vital infrastructure to support future technology and what is just a bright, shiny toy today that tomorrow is going to be passé? And so I don't have a good answer, but it does keep me up at night a little bit. If that helps.
Good evening. Thank you very much for being here. I have a couple of questions. A project of this magnitude for Colorado, for Denver, for the small subcontractors and local contractors, how are you going to, or are you going to, keep the business in Colorado, number one, and then also, given the recent disparity study that the City and County of Denver just completed, showing that historically underutilized businesses, whether they be small, woman-owned, minority, are not utilized on projects unless goals are set. Will the city be setting goals for these kinds of projects, or this project?
You want to take that? I can take that.
So as far as who Reece hires, we have little control over that. If that's your question. I think for other projects in the city that are led by the city, that are public infrastructure projects, then absolutely there are goals. There are very stringent goals. We just, as the government, have a difficult time telling people who to hire.
Yeah, and the flip side of that is Meow Wolf is under construction right now, like I mentioned, at the south edge of the site. We've hired Turner Construction, and they have a very strong policy of women and minority-owned business hiring practices, as does Meow Wolf, our tenant, and so we see that playing out on that site. But it's a challenge as well to get qualified trades in that meet that criteria. It's a constant battle, but it's working so far, I think.
Very exciting. What can you tell me about the impacts on the surrounding communities and any inputs that you've received from the different metro area communities?
Yeah, it kind of gets back to Barb's question about how did this get approved without any opposition to it. I think a little bit has to do with geography, that it is an island, if you think about it. It's cut off from the city by a river and by a heavy rail line and Spear Boulevard and I-25, and so it's not proximate as some other developments are. I will tell you a story that was really interesting, and I went to a neighborhood meeting at Jefferson Park just across the highway. We were talking about it and telling them about our vision, and I gave them the whole presentation, and they said, well, how are we going to get to it? And I didn't realize, kind of the magnitude of that comment until someone pointed it out to me and said, if your biggest concern from your neighbors is how they're going to get to your development, you're probably doing something right. And so, not to say that people didn't have concerns, but I think that was our job to address them as best we can.
And I think that's great. Tell me about the surrounding metro communities from, say, Broomfield all the way down to Castle Rock, Parker, Aurora, so on. Have you received any input, and do you anticipate any impacts?
That's an interesting question. I've never had that one. No, the short answer is no. I haven't had any input from them.
So it's a tough question. I think engaging Castle Rock to get input from them on what the future of this site would be. We spend all of our time trying to engage with the surrounding communities like Jefferson Park and Highland and Lodo and Auraria and Lincoln Park and the immediately surrounding. So no, we did not take that step and ask. One thing that is interesting is CDOT is currently working on a planning and environmental linkage study for I-25, and a number of folks using I-25 are living in Castle Rock, working in downtown or vice versa. And I think what we've discussed with CDOT about this project is that you can do both of those here, and sure, people are still, it's I think, unreasonable to think that people will live here and work here and no one will leave. So sure, there will be more traffic and there will be more people to move. However, I think by creating the mixture of uses and by building out a more robust downtown with more services and places to live and places to work and shop and play, that we are potentially reducing our reliance on I-25 and the surrounding communities.
This will be our last question.
Hi, my name is Dominique. I'm actually a student here at DU within the Burns School. My question is actually just in regards to our environment and trying to make more sustainable initiatives when it comes to construction. I certainly appreciate you promoting walkability and cycling and then less cars on your site just through your site development plan. My question is, as the developer, are you going to have any sort of impact on the construction personnel that come in and construct on your site, and is there going to be a focus on more sustainable green construction for this particular project?
Yeah, that's part of a bigger question, and it gets to a regulatory question, right? I mean, I'm really constrained as a builder or developer by zoning code, by building code, by the IBC, the International Building Code, and I think until we see a shift in that to allow more greener options, more sustainable options, we're kind of stuck with what we have right now unfortunately. Where my focus is on the site, sustainability-wise, is on the site horizontally, because I have a little bit more freedom there. And so that gets to kind of our One Water initiatives. How do we recapture wastewater and harvest heat from it? And how do we have a gray water system for irrigation? And how do we handle stormwater runoff and those sorts of things? So that's where I think that I can be impactful, absent some code changes.
Thank you.
Very good. So I want to thank you all for attending this evening, and I think it's a pretty exciting project. I think it definitely will have an impact in a positive way, I'm certainly hoping, and it looks that way to me. And thank you for attending another Voices of Experience event here tonight. Just a couple housekeeping items. Continuing education credits are available in the lobby if you're seeking that. And the other thing is I just want to invite you to the upcoming VOE events in May. And then finally, I'd like you to give a big round of applause to Reece and Steve and say thank you.